Hello, everyone. I want to thank you for joining me today. Many of you may already know about the Alaska Supreme Court Order 1993. This was a court order that changed Alaskans' right to petition for a civil investigative grand jury. The grand jury is not only used in criminal cases, so it does not take being a criminal to worry about the rule changes that came about because of Supreme Court Order 1993. So I recommend to all Alaskans to follow my series about this order. And this video will be part 1 of a series about Supreme Court Order 1993. This episode is an introduction into what is a grand jury. But first, I must make a disclaimer as I introduce myself. My name is Jessica Schultz-Pleasant. I am legally required to inform you that I am a paralegal. While I'm trained in similar skills as an attorney, I am not allowed to give legal advice. Furthermore, these videos are for research and entertainment purposes. I was a heavy wheel vehicle mechanic in the Army. Also, I'm known as the first female to score a rushing touchdown in a male varsity football game. I spent years within a domestic violence charity. I played a role of security and helped with the children's program. I also volunteered in a teen maternity home. I co-founded an animal rescue called Friends of Campbell County Animals. This charity focused on spay and neutering, shelter reform, barn cats, and participated in a multi-state interstate relay transporting pets from the south to the north on I-75. I am also an advocate journalist, and my articles can be found at theconservativefem.com. My work has been predominantly about the grand jury laws and the efforts of the Alaska Grand Jurors Association. The United States legal system and doctrines originated in Europe. Most importantly, England's Magna Carta was a document that limited the actions of the king. This redefined the relationship between the king and the barons. According to the U.S. Congress website, the grand jury acquired an independence in England free from control by the crown or judges. Its adoption in our Constitution as the sole method for preferring charges in serious criminal cases shows the high place it held as an instrument of justice. The basic purpose of the English grand jury was to provide a fair method for instituting criminal proceedings against persons believed to have committed crimes. Prior to American independence, Britain established its own government and courts in the colonies. The officers that filled these roles often felt invincible because they were basically out of sight and out of mind of the crown. The citizens in America felt oppressed by rulers that would abuse their power. One of the earliest uses of the grand jury in America was in the case of Zenger and the freedom of the press, which is the Crown versus Zenger. After William Cosby was appointed as the royal governor of New York, he seized half the income of the previous governor's wages and began to abuse his position against citizens that criticized him. John Peter Zenger was one critic of Cosby. Zenger was influential in the community because he was a political critic, journalist, and was the publisher of the New York Weekly Journal. To silence Zenger, Governor Cosby created a court that had judges that could be friendly to Cosby. He used this court to charge Zenger with seditious libel. Essentially, the claim was Zenger was publishing lies that were meant to undermine the crown's legitimacy. Zenger was successful in his defense, and his case established the foundation for the freedom of the press in America. According to Black's Law Dictionary, the grand jury serves or may serve two distinct functions. One is screen function. The grand jury evaluates evidence supporting possible charges and returns an indictment only in those cases in which the evidence amounts to at least probable cause. The other is investigatorial function. The grand jury sometimes develops information that is of value of determining grounds for a charge exists, perhaps incidentally in proving that charge at the defendant's later criminal trial. According to Britannica, the grand jury is the following. Though it holds judicial inquiries, the grand jury does not decide guilt or innocence. Its function is inquisitorial and accusatorial, unlike that of the petite jury, which tries cases. The grand jury's function is to decide whether there is probable cause or prima facie evidence to believe that a person has committed a crime. Also, should it so decide an indictment, a formal accusation of crime is returned and the accused must stand trial before a petite or trial jury whose duty is to determine the question of guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. The grand jury enjoys greater independence than the petite jury. It is instructed by the court prosecutor on questions of law and fact, but its investigations are relatively free from supervision. Although the jury works closely with the prosecutor, it is not formally under his control. According to Cornell Law School, the grand jury acts as an investigative body, acting independently of either prosecuting attorney or judge. The prosecutor's attempt to establish probable cause to believe that a criminal offense has been committed. The grand jury may request that the court compel further evidence, including witness testimony and subpoenas of documents. This is some case law that describes the purpose of the grand jury. In Miami Herald Publishing Company versus Marco, it says, if the people are to remain confident in this type of government, there should be a body of citizens capable of monitoring official wrongdoing. And in Jones v. People, it states, when the grand jury merely considers a request for an indictment, it does not affirmatively assist the state. The grand jury's role is inherently of a buffer between the state. I will briefly describe the differences between these two types of grand juries. The criminal grand jury is usually initiated by the prosecutor with his accusations against an individual. From the beginning, this kind of case is criminal. The burden of proof for the grand jury to issue an indictment is probable cause. The grand jury does not determine guilt or innocence, because allegations only become formal accusations when an indictment is ordered. The grand jury has an oath of strict confidence. This is because of the possibility of defamation, and false allegations often lead to the disruption of an innocent person's life. Now, civil grand juries may be initiated by a citizen requesting the grand jury to investigate the government's actions. A civil grand jury is often used yearly, with a grand jury tasked with oversight over government agencies. This grand jury is meant to ensure the government facilities, like jails, are ran in a humane way. Also, the grand jury may subpoena government records and witnesses. The complaint begins as a civil complaint and may lead to a report after the civil investigation. The report makes recommendations to improve the policies and procedures of the government and to hold officials accountable. Just like the criminal grand jury, witnesses, like officials, may have damage to their character. So this grand jury is also held in secrecy. Because the grand jury is independent from the prosecutor, their hearings are more flexible. I'd like to share with you some commentary from local David Ignell and from Northwestern University School of Law. I want to share this paragraph from an article by David Ignell called The Alaska Grand Jury. For now, I just want to share this quote because I am planning to do a more in-depth dive into his work. And this quote says, Alaskans have a fourth pillar of government to help salvage their constitutional rights. And this is an impartial body of ordinary citizens. It exists primarily for the purpose of curbing inappropriate government behavior and protecting citizens. As founder Yule Kilcher told his fellow delegates during the Alaska Constitutional Convention, the Alaska Grand Jury may be the refuge of last resort for the people whose cases are not dealt properly by the courts, often for political reasons. The model of a grand jury is one that exercises independent judgment while serving as both an accusatory and investigatory body. In the latter role, commonly referred to as the sword, the grand jury uncovers wrongdoing and criminal misconduct through its sweeping investigatory powers that include the right to issue subpoenas. This paragraph, it discusses how the grand jury assumes an accusatory role to judge the weight of evidence brought before it to determine if there's probable cause to issue an indictment. At this stage, when acting as a shield, the Supreme Court has described the grand jury as a protector of citizens against unfounded criminal prosecutions. This paragraph says a grand jury can be started even if there's no probable cause. The grand jury can start looking at evidence and investigating merely on suspicion that the law is being violated, or even just because it wants assurance that it is not. Furthermore, this suspicion can be based on tips, rumors, hearsay, speculation, or the grand juror's personal knowledge. However, when probable cause is found to exist, grand juries can refrain from issuing an indictment if the charges do not reflect the views or interests of the community. And this last slide says, local citizen participation in grand juries keeps the process free from the biases of government service. Granted, grand jurors serve with their own prejudices, but these prejudices generally reflect the society from which they are drawn, rather than being derived from having prosecuted or adjudicated one too many cases. Yet despite the critical role played by citizens in the federal criminal justice system, fewer opportunities are available to them to shape or influence the process. The grand jury survives as one of the last remaining avenues where they can actually express their views with respect to the prosecution of federal laws. And that is the end of this presentation. I want to thank you for joining me, and you can visit my site at theconservativefem.com. If you'd like to learn more about the Supreme Court Order 1993, please do a search online for the Alaska Grand Juror Association, and you can follow up, look into the information provided, and find out how you can contribute to the movement. Thank you, and see you next time.